The main event of the evening, the rematch, much anticipated, between
Hmm.
Israel Adesanya and Robert Whittaker. It goes the distance, and Israel Adesanya gets the victory once again, this time via unanimous decision. And Dominic, I mean, right off the top, the fight was a bit what I expected.
Hmm.
I expected this. I expected Robert Whittaker to do a better job here than he did in the first fight,
Yep.
and I think I can say he did.
Yep.
I expected it to go all 5 rounds. I thought neither guy was going to really give an inch here, was
Yep.
going to allow himself into any sort of vulnerable position that could potentially be a fight ending sequence. And I didn't expect a ton of action. I know you probably had maybe a little bit
A little bit
more
more. Yeah.
hope for that, but I just kind of thought this was very much the kind of fight I thought we were going to get.
Hmm.
I thought it was fine. I was on. I was very much invested the whole time, all 5 rounds. I was intrigued at what was happening. I enjoyed seeing kind of Whitaker's late push. The championship rounds where he kind of really pushed it in the end. But
Oh yeah, rounds were
again,
close, man.
very close rounds and kind of surprisingly, considering this was the Texas judges who had been who
Yeah.
I guess to
Yeah.
their credit never got a fight wrong all night, but
True.
had some weird scorecards, and we've seen this is the place that didn't give Dominic Reyes the win over John Jones. So
Yeah. Yeah.
very much was like when the scorecards were getting read off, you're kind of sitting there on the edge of your seat, like, oh my gosh.
Especially when you have a parlay and bet on the line.
Exactly. So I'm gonna let you give your chance to talk about the fight, and I guess we'll start with the champion, Israel Adesanya. This is 4 title defenses for him
Mm,
now. Um, you're the biggest Anderson Silva fan, I know,
yeah.
and
I
from
take
your
great pride in that, Noah.
yeah. So from your perspective, being that you're such a big Anderson Silva fan, how close with this win is Israel Adesanya in sort of surpassing Anderson Silva as the best middleweight of all time or one of the best fighters in UFC history?
Yeah, I mean, everybody likes to automatically point directly to the quantitative numbers first. Well, Anderson has 10 title defenses, Israel has 4. He's got 6 to go, right? He can't be better until he reaches that. There's way more to it than that, especially at this day and age with the competition. So while he's closing the gap, much like Usman is closing the gap with GSP, there's still plenty of room left to go for Israel Adesanya. But I can't help but take away from this fight after watching it that damn right now in 2022 this man is one of the best pound for pound fighters in the world. He is a top-notch talent. This fight to me was very much a technical chess match back and forth. It felt like the two best middleweights in the world, and that's what we got to see. To me, yes, the output wasn't what I expected based on my epiphany that I've been talking about all year, but it did go 5 rounds back and forth, super razor thin. So Adesanya, man, he's the king of the middleweights right now. And whilst I think he can potentially reach Anderson Silva in terms of like where I feel an all-time great status, there's still plenty of room left to go. And for Israel, he's hinted at wanting to move up to 205. He's obviously done it once and failed, but I still think we're going to see him do it again. We saw Anderson Silva succeed there numerous times, not for a title, but there are just so many similarities between these two. When they fought, it felt like that passing of the torch. So it's this is the modern day, almost version of Anderson Silva with a few less finishes in the UFC, but he's dominant. 4 title defenses is a ton. Not a lot of people do that, even though it seems like a small number. So while he's getting closer, he's not quite there yet. But again, man, what a performance by him. It just feels like every time I see Adesanya step in there, of course, at middleweight, that is, I just have new takeaways from him. He is just so good and continues to improve every time. Regardless of how close the fight is, there's something new we see from him.
Yeah, I that's a good way to put it because not every fight is the most exciting fight in the world. This
Yeah,
one wasn't. The Marvin Vettori rematch wasn't. The Yoel Romero fight certainly wasn't.
your shit sandwich.
But he's must see TV in my opinion
He
here. I
is,
mean
man. He is.
he's at that point where even if it's not the most exciting fight, you're almost just in awe of how good he really is.
Mm-hmm.
And this fight was kind of a delight for that, not just for him, but for Robert Whittaker as well, because
Yep.
especially for the first 3 rounds or so, it just felt like Izzy just was a step ahead. Just Robert, you could see the improvements. You could see the effort, the game plan, but it just seemed like a guy who just simply had no answers.
Yeah.
But then he did start to find success in the championship rounds, getting those takedowns, and ultimately, even when Adesanya would pretty much make his way back up immediately, using that closed distance to at least try to land something worthwhile. And that did start to have some success for him in the later rounds. But this fight really just, I mean, it solidified that you're right, the two best in the world, and ultimately Adesanya being just the best in the world. There's just a pretty decent gap between number one and number two.
Yep.
As far as him being compared to Anderson Silva, this again I think is just a product of MMA. Unfortunately, doesn't have much resonance for the past. They don't seem to have much of a sense of nostalgia, and in some ways that can be good because you kind of, like we've talked about in the past, we grew up being wrestling fans, and I think a big problem that a lot of fans that are still watching today seem to have with the product is that they don't really build up their stars of today. They keep going back to the Goldbergs and Brock Lesnar's and people that were big 20 years ago. So in a way, it's like a blessing that MMA is so focused on building the stars of today.
Yes.
But it gets a little frustrating when it comes to like GOAT status and talking about all-time greats, because it feels premature, in my opinion, for these comparisons between Adesanya and Silva. Not comparisons by themselves, because he is very much like the modern-day Anderson Silva. I mean, the passing of the torch was pretty much him beating Silva. I mean, you're completely justified to make comparisons, but to even for me to even, if you even are so much as considering thinking that he is above Anderson Silva, I think that's just a little premature.
You need to get on Fight Pass.
Anderson Silva is a top 3 fighter in UFC history. Yeah. Adesanya is certainly making his way there, but I mean, if I'm being honest, like, is Adesanya, if you were to list out your top fighters of all time, I mean, he's probably in the top 20.
Yes.
But, I mean, again, I'm not quite ready to say that he's, like, one of the all-time best. Now, he certainly has the potential to get there.
Oh, yes.
And if he keeps going at this rate and staying as active as he wants to be, he's talking about wanting to fight in June, which I know we're going to talk about. That's just going to make it all the more quicker to get there.
Yes.
And, of course, if he goes back up to light heavyweight, if he were to win a title there,
then we're talking,
Yeah, we're really getting into some stuff there. But as it stands right now, he is a fantastic fighter, one of the best pound for pound today, but I'm not quite ready to say he's like the best middleweight of all time.
Yeah.
I just think it's a bit premature. And I think what's unfortunate for him, I kind of told you this off recording, I'm going to try to see how I can articulate this right now. It's going to be hard for Adesanya to really reach Anderson Silva, not just because it's hard to get to that many title defenses or anything like that, but it's more so just because when you really look ahead, and I know every division may go through this with a dominant champion, and it feels like, oh, where's the true contenders left? And right now, Adesanya's got Jared Cannonier, and then he's got Sean Strickland. And compared to the other divisions, like welterweight, who's got these studs on the way up. Not only is Kamaru Usman likely fighting Leon Edwards next, but you have Khamzat Chimaev coming up. You have Shavkat Rakhmonov on his way up.
You still have Luque in there and all these other
guys. Oh, my gosh, yeah. Vicente Luque, perhaps Bilal Muhammad. I mean, there's guys in there.
Yes.
And even if, like, for God's sakes, I mean, even Stephen Thompson could still go on and win. It's and even a rematch with Gilbert Burns is interesting, and like there are still plenty of matchups that could really boost Kamaru Usman's all-time status,
and they're all very much exciting.
Yes. While for Adesanya, I just think the middleweight division is just a little thinner, and there's not those big prospects that I'm looking at right now, like. Dricus du Plessis, I think, a very interesting one, but he still feels much further away than like Khamzat is right now.
Maybe like Alex Pereira. There's that history with him and Izzy. Bruno Silva.
Darren Till's still a guy that I want to have hope for, but then And I still think a fight with him and Izzy is interesting, but
Yeah.
you got to put the wins together.
Yeah.
If Kelvin Gastelum could ever go on a winning streak, like I'd love to see them have a rematch. Just
And see, but as you're saying this, it's in my head. I'm just like, there's many more what ifs for Israel than there is for like a Kamaru Usman,
So it's just going to be hard when you're talking about legacy building for Israel to really get. I mean, he can still climb just by stacking up wins, but it's just not gonna. He's not gonna be able to move as he's not gonna be able to jump so far by simply beating Jared Cannonier and Sean Strickland. Like he should beat those guys theoretically.
Yeah.
But if he goes up to light heavyweight and beats Yuri Prohaska, Glover Teixeira, or Jan Blachowicz, or Alexander Rakic, whoever, all of a sudden you kind of go, oh, okay.
Here we go. Yeah.
Now you're talking legacy again, winning a second belt. So it feels like he has done so much work in building that legacy up to this point that it's going to be really hard for him to continue at that rate moving forward, no matter how active he is, just because the threats aren't really there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true.
But let's talk about Robert Whittaker, because he's in a very interesting spot now, unfortunate spot.
Yeah.
He respectfully felt like he had done enough to win. So I guess maybe I should have asked you this at the forefront. How did you score the fight?
Yeah, we saw real quickly. We saw people throwing around that word robbery again. So, some people, not as many, but just a few. Because one of our loyal listeners, Michael, actually messaged me on Facebook talking about this fight.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So we kind of went back and forth, and I'm like, yeah, man. I personally had it 4-1 Izzy, minimum 3-2. I love Robert Whittaker. He did do a lot of good things, and these rounds were close. But it just like at the end of that fight, it felt Adesanya won this fight. As a whole, he won this fight. So I think the judges got it right. I don't necessarily see Whittaker, winning that, but as respectfully as he is, he did kind of say that he thought he won, and it was close, just not close enough for me personally. And did you kind of score it the same way?
Yeah, I think I said 3-2 Izzy. I can't remember now, but I think it was 3-2 Izzy. I said, and truthfully, even though I had it, one more round for Whittaker, I just can't really see where you scored this fight for Robert Whittaker. I understand maybe rooting for him, and again, these rounds were very close, but I can't help but feel like anybody scoring this fight for Whittaker, they kind of clung to those moments.
Yeah.
To those kind of moments he would have, rather than looking at the round as a whole. Because you get excited at the potential of a takedown, but then as he gets right back up. And I saw Chael Sonnen thought Robert Whittaker won this fight.
Oh, really?
Saab thought Robert Whittaker won this fight. Of course, Chael did, because Chael is a wrestler. And,
true.
Robert Whittaker did do a pretty good job of getting the takedowns, but just it was getting any sort of damage or any sort of submission attempts. He had that one where he kind of was riding on the back, and again, though, he got kind of flung off, and that was it. So, okay, so we're on the same page. We both scored it for Israel Adesanya, but Robert Whittaker still respectful in the post fight, but feeling like he had done enough to win and still coming up short.
That's a tough spot.
What I'm just going to ask you, I guess there's no real other way to word this. I mean, what if you're in Robert Whittaker's shoes, or as a fan of Robert Whittaker? I mean, where does he go from here? Because this is, he's a guy that started his career at 170 pounds.
Yeah.
He moved up because, again, it was just he wasn't really at his peak performance at 170 pounds. But by all means, 185 is like he's not going up from here. I don't think.
No.
I think this is the division for him. I don't see him anywhere else but 185 pounds.
Yeah.
So now that you've been clearly bested twice by a dominant champion, and now you're sort of in this Rich Franklin, Joseph Benavidez sort of status. I mean, where does he really go next?
Knowing Bobby Knuckles, I think he just keeps taking on contenders until he gets another title shot. I mean, I almost view him as like a Max Holloway right now, like a Colby Covington, where they're the clear second best guy in that division, and they're still like leaps and bounds above like Robert Whittaker bested for the most part Jared Cannonier over the course of 3 rounds outside of getting hurt. Jared Cannonier won last night and is probably getting the next title fight. But I still feel like overall Robert Whittaker's better. You know what I mean? I still think Robert Whittaker better than Sean Strickland. Maybe we see him fight Sean Strickland, truthfully.
Yeah.
But I think he's still there, welcoming not like up and comers, because he's going to be the guy. He's not a gatekeeper, but he in a sense is like a gatekeeper to, you want to get a title shot? I'm sitting right here at number one. Because by the way, I never lost my number one spot in the rankings, and he probably still won't, even after Cannonier's win that we're going to talk about here in a few minutes. So I think he's just still right there. For God's sakes, he could tally off 3 more wins and fight for another belt. Who knows, is he still the champ by then or not? But he is so good. He's still in his prime, I think 31 or 32. And you look at all he's accomplished, which relates him even more to what Max Holloway is right now in terms of standing. So I think he just kind of sits right there. And you want a title shot? I'll be right here waiting for you, you know?
I think you're partially on the right track. I do wonder though, if you're a guy if you're at UFC and you're booking fights for Robert Whittaker, if you have a guy who is looking like maybe he could be a title challenger for Izzy, do you risk having him fight Robert Whittaker knowing that you're not going to give Robert Whittaker a title fight if he wins, you know?
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, so that makes it interesting. Is like, okay, what matchups do you want to put Robert Whittaker in? Because, you're potentially risking a title challenger in the process. I think a perfect matchup, if I'm looking ahead, him and Marvin Vettori.
I know, that's perfect. A good fight, man.
2 guys that obviously have lost to the champion twice. They are 2 of the top dogs in this division, both so talented, but really aren't fighting for a whole lot of anything right now, unfortunately, besides holding ground.
Yep.
So you have those 2 fight. I think that's an excellent main event, second half of 2022. I would be all about that. But I guess in the long-term outlook, I mean, you're right. There's really not much else for him to do. Again, I don't think him moving up or down a division is really in the question. There is the hope probably for Izzy to leave the division, and then maybe that opens the door for you. But you can't really, prepare for that. So I think what really hurts, though, Dominic, is it took him 3 wins to get this second fight. So how many is it going to take for him to
get a third?
He's ready for a third fight. And then you look at all the contenders around him. I mean, he hasn't fought Marvin Vettori. He hasn't fought Sean Strickland. But then, I mean, he's fought Cannonier. Well, I guess he hasn't fought Paulo Costa, but Costa's
he was supposed to at least.
Yeah, Costa's status is a bit up in the air, being overweight 20 pounds and whatnot. But, he fought Brunson. He fought Gastelum. He fought Darren Till. Like, there's not a ton of guys in the immediate future for him. So, yes, for the rest of this year, maybe you have a couple fights that you could potentially do with him. But we just need some and this is the same thing I was talking about for Izzy. We just need some shakeup in this division to kind of freshen things up. Just things. I don't want things to get too stale here because you got a lot of guys kind of sitting here not moving around a lot, ranking.
And when you have a champion, and when you have a champion like Izzy who wants to keep fighting, it's like, well, shit, guys, come on, we got to churn out contenders for me to keep defending the belt,
So I mean, and Robert Whittaker is just the ultimate professional, so I don't see this hindering him too much. I don't see this deflating him too far and making him not the same fighter moving forward. He obviously feels confident in what he did here in this fight, and he said as much afterwards. He said, "Look, he's like, we're the 2 best in the division. I know it. He knows it." So I think for him, there's always going to be that hope that if you win enough times, you do get a third fight. And it is interesting. You compared it to a Max Holloway, who it's kind of a similar situation, but yet Max Holloway got it. Well, I guess as of now, he hasn't gotten a third fight, but
true.
Everybody was so sure that a third fight was in reach. And I know the second fight with Volkanovski, that is for Max Holloway, was razor thin, and a lot of people thought Max won, but he technically didn't. So it's kind of funny that everybody was so on board with Max getting a third fight and saying that was in reach. But for Robert, it feels it feels like it's a mile away at this point. So
definitely.
It'll definitely be a long journey back. And again, it could be as long as Izzy is really here. If he goes up a division, then things might change. But a tough loss, but I still plenty of big fights left for him.